Podcast, Data Solutions, podcast. Okay, so this one is one less about running the actual float center and more about running the appearance of a float tank center.
Oh, just like the facade, like setting. How do I set up a cardboard cutout of a float center
and lure people in? Okay, so what should I be doing for a website setup?
Website setup.
Website setup. Yes.
Okay, that's a good question.
You should probably have one.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing to have nowadays.
Good advice. If you were debating whether or not to go with a website or just no website, probably website.
Yeah, this is just some of the insights you're going to get from the Daily Solutions podcast. You should have a website as a business.
Solid goal. All right. So the thing is, though, you don't really need anything that fancy.
Yeah.
Right. You don't need a crazy website. You're not a web-based business. Your job is not to impress people with your prowess at web design. Your goal is just to get them excited about floating and specifically
make it easy to book an appointment.
To come in, yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, most of the booking software out there is going to make it pretty easy to book an appointment.
So in terms of like actually how to build your website, I mean, that's kind of the first question, right? What platform do I build it in? And you hear a bunch of things ranging from, you can build it yourself, or you can, use things like Joomla, or there's all these kind of crazy words that people throw out there. But one of the biggest ones is WordPress. I forget what the statistic is of like how many websites on the internet are.
200% of all websites.
200% of all websites are WordPress. So it's huge, and it's used by big companies and big websites, and it's basically like
Floating Solutions.
It's Floating Solutions is a WordPress site. The Float Conference is a WordPress site. Our Float HQ site is a WordPress site. The nice thing about it is it basically makes a user interface for you to build a website. So it's got a whole back end, and like if you want to add a new page, you just hit a big button that says add new page. And like if you want to, make sure you put this in the title, there's like a box that says title and you type it in there. So it's approachable, and it's also so widely used at this point that there's all sorts of plugins and things you can add on top of it that do, a variety of almost anything you would want a website to do at this point.
And the kind of fancy name for these is CMSs, or content management systems, of which WordPress is just one, Joomla is another, Drupal is another. But WordPress by far is going to be the most supported of those out there.
And there's basically a spectrum, right? So on one end, you're just coding everything, and there's no kind of user interface for you to follow. And on the other end there's kind of no real back end. These are called like WYSIWYG websites. What you see is what you get, where you literally have your website, and if you want like a paragraph to be above a picture, you just drag it with your mouse and put it above the picture, and you're kind of really just playing with like what the website is on its very, very kind of outside. And then in the middle is something like WordPress, where there is a backdoor and you go through and you kind of adjust everything. And pretty much along that spectrum, you're balancing like ease of use and customizability. Like the more you want to customize something to exactly how you want it to be, the more you're leaning towards building a website completely from scratch yourself, which is very difficult. And the less you care about customizing things, the more you're building super, super simple websites that are easy to use and easy to manipulate, like those WYSIWYG sites. Things like Wix is an example of that.
And I'll give you a hint. When you're designing your Float Center website, you probably don't care too much about having control over it.
Yeah, so that kind of WordPress is that middle ground that a lot of people end up going with.
Another really common one that's even more hold your hand through the process kind of style is Squarespace.
Yeah.
And that's a more recent development than WordPress by far. And basically came about as a response to a lot of these other CMSs that were a little more complicated. And it truly is one that you can design a really nice, very modern-looking website that takes advantage of responsive design and all of these other kind of buzzwords that you might hear going around there, and does all the heavy lifting for you. And you're really just entering in your content, the types of effects you want to have happen, different photos, and everything comes out the other end looking very much like a lot of Squarespace websites. So if you start designing in there, you'll be like, oh, like every single spa in my town uses Squarespace. I get it. That's why they all look like kind of the same. And so you'll be one of those, right? You'll be one of those very stylish, nice-looking websites that kind of looks like a lot of other content on the web, especially small shops. But there's a reason for that. which is it's easy to use, and your job, again, is not to be a really fancy web design company. You don't need the fanciest things. Like, at its core, you have a link for people to click to schedule, you have your address, some stuff about you, some stuff about floating. Like, none of that's too crazy or complicated. So going with Squarespace is a very appealing kind of idea, especially if you don't have a lot of experience in web design yourself.
Yeah, it's pretty typical, unless you have a decent hand at this stuff, it's pretty typical to find a freelance person or a company to kind of help you with this, with building your website. And my personal advice is always to find a company that can help you with the trickier parts. Like, setting up a website in the first place is like probably one of the most difficult parts of having a website. And then sometimes websites just throw you crazy errors. It's like, oh, this like crazy like plugin Node 3.4 thing needs to be like updated but can't. And you're like, oh, I have no idea what that means. So it's nice to have.
Idea?
Woo! Good one. That was a good one. Yeah. So it's nice to have someone that you're paying money to who knows stuff like that, who can just deal with that sort of shit so you don't have to. So it's nice to have that. But in my mind, you want to have enough wherewithal in your website to be able to go make small changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you just want to be like, oh, I just need to, on my homepage, like I want to change the title of this one little section of it. Like, you don't want to have to, every time you want to make a small change like that, have to contact your like web developer and pay them money to go into this thing. And again, WordPress can be nice because it's easy to do those parts of it. And so that's what I find to be a nice balance. Like, find someone you can pay to do the parts that are weird, crazy strings of error message words that don't make any sense to you. But give yourself enough training and spend a little bit of time figuring it out to the point where if you just need to do changing text or changing a picture or small stuff like that on your website, you can do it by yourself without anybody else having to kind of be the gatekeeper.
And that's actually just what I'd say is a really good litmus test for wherever you end up going. Even if it's raw HTML, CSS, and you're doing the coding by hand, if that gets you to the point where you feel confident in changing text or an image and you can actually manipulate that raw HTML, CSS, then that's a fine option.
Yeah.
If even using WordPress, you can't get to that point because technology is so kind of scary and different sizes of images don't even really make sense to you, then yeah, maybe something that holds your hand even more than that is really what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So the level that because it just sucks, like the having to go back to a web developer or needing to just wait for a week for someone to respond to an email in order to change something really simple or a typo or something is so annoying. So getting it in your own hands and feeling confident is probably prime.
And often you change something and you're like, oh no, that actually didn't look as good as I thought it did. And so it's nice to be able to like try 4 or 5 things until you get it right instead of waiting for someone to do that and having a lot of back and forth. Just sounds very annoying.
Yep. And so other parts of this, just to go over them really quick. I mean, the nice thing is this isn't float-specific knowledge, so we'll kind of load you up with a bunch of keywords here, and then you can go do a bunch of research on your own once you kind of know how it basically works. But in addition to figuring out what you're actually going to design your site on, you're going to need a domain, so you're going to need an address, which is, in our case, it's Float HQ. A lot of people do just the name of their business, which unfortunately Float On was taken by a boat trailer company down in Florida who adamantly refuses to sell their domain to us. So we were unable to get floaton.com. But that's kind of your address. It's the equivalent of, if you have a house, you have your house and your property and your address, right? And so that's the address part is your whatever.com is the address. And then the property is kind of like the hosting company that you're using. So HostGator is one. Bluehost is another that's really common. All of these are going to cost you maybe around $10 to $13 a month. So really affordable. Some of them even go down to like $5 or $7. And that's, again, like your property. That's where your house is going to sit on. And then something like using WordPress or Squarespace, that's your actual house that you're building on there. So once you have your address, you have your property, you have your house. That's kind of the full array that you need in order to get your website up and hosted and have people be able to visit it.
And then from there, the business just starts streaming in, As soon as you get your website up, it'll just be nonstop people.
Yep, and that pretty much also concludes everything we have to say about marketing. Good. Wonderful. Well, good question, and we will talk to you all tomorrow.
Yeah, if you guys have any other questions you want us to answer, you can go to floattanksolutions.com/podcast. Talk to you later.
Bye.